Summary of Daisy Miller by Henry James. Daisy Miller starts in the Swiss resort town of Vevey, where a young American named Mr. Winterbourne has come from Geneva, where, according to rumors, he either studies or chases an older foreign woman to spend some time with his aunt, Mrs. Costello. Winterbourne meets a young American boy who is chatty and wants to start a conversation with him right away. When the boy's sister shows up, Winterbourne finds out that they are Daisy and Randolph Miller. Winterbourne thinks Daisy is pretty, but at first she doesn't pay much attention to him. However, she soon warms up to him and starts talking to him, which surprises him because women in Geneva are usually quiet and don't talk much. Daisy asks him to take her to the Château de Chillon, a castle on the other side of the lake that she's been wanting to see. When Winterbourne asks his aunt about the Millers, she says they are rude people. This makes him sad because he is really interested in Daisy and wanted to show her to his aunt. Mrs. Costello is especially upset that Daisy wants to go to the house with Winterbourne without anyone else. That night, Winterbourne sees Daisy again, and later, she introduces him to her mother, Mrs. Miller, who seems both confused and unmoved by Daisy's openness with him. Daisy asks Winterbourne to take her out on a boat by herself, even though it is late at night. Eugenio, the messenger, comes to tell them that he has finally gotten Randolph to go to bed, so they all go to bed. A few days later, Winterbourne goes to the house with Daisy. He likes to watch her and listen to what she has to say, but he's a little unhappy that, even though she's very honest with him, she doesn't seem nervous like he thinks a young woman would if she liked him. But when Winterbourne says he has to go back to Geneva soon, Daisy is angry and thinks he has a girlfriend there. She keeps complaining until Winterbourne decides to meet her in Rome the next winter. His aunt lives there, and that's where the Millers are going next. When Winterbourne gets to Rome, his aunt tells him that Daisy is the talk of the town because she wanders around alone and is always surrounded by admiring Italian gents. Winterbourne doesn't like the idea of having so much competition, so he goes to see Mrs. Walker, a friend from Geneva. There, though, he meets the Millers, who are also there to see Mrs. Walker. Winterbourne talks to Mrs. Miller for a while before he greets Daisy. Daisy is quick to let him know how unhappy she is with how he left her at Vevey. Daisy and Winterbourne had only known each other for a few days, so Mrs. Walker finds it strange that she would act this way. Daisy says that she is going to go for a walk to meet her Italian friend, Mr. Giovanelli. Mrs. Walker begs her not to go by herself, and Daisy suggests cheerfully that Winterbourne go with her. When they go for a walk in the Pincian grounds, they meet Giovanelli, a handsome Italian man. Soon, though, Mrs. Walker comes after them in a carriage, begging Daisy to get in because everyone is talking about her. Daisy stands firm and says no. Then, Mrs. Walker, who is angry and upset, makes Winterbourne leave Daisy and Giovanelli and come with her. Winterbourne is having a hard time calling Daisy because she is always out or with Giovanelli. Mrs. Miller goes to Mrs. Walker's party by herself, saying that Daisy is busy playing piano with Giovanelli and will be late. Mrs. Walker is upset and shocked, so she chooses not to talk to Daisy. Daisy goes with Giovanelli, and as usual, she is bright and happy. Daisy says that Winterbourne is being rude when he tries to tell her what people are saying. She then spends the rest of the night with her Italian friend. When Mrs. Walker gets up to leave, she turns her back on Daisy. Winterbourne watches and feels bad for Daisy, who seems lost and unsure. After that, Mrs. Walker and her friends stopped having Daisy at their parties. At a tourist spot one day, Winterbourne runs into Daisy and Giovanelli. He tries again to tell her what people are saying, but she tells him that he should stop people from being mean. When Winterbourne asks if she's engaged to Giovanelli, Daisy says she is at first, but when he says he believes her, she says she's not. After a week, Winterbourne goes out to eat and then chooses to walk home in the moonlight. He sneaks a look into the beautifully lit Colosseum, but then he remembers that this is how you get Roman fever. He is getting ready to leave when he sees Daisy and Giovanelli. Winterbourne is both angry and pleased that he finally thinks he knows that Daisy is just a low, dishonorable woman. Still, it's risky for her to be there at this time, and when he asks Giovanelli why he brought her, he says he can't stop Daisy from doing what she wants. Winterbourne finally gets them to agree to leave. But soon after that, Daisy gets very sick. When Winterbourne comes to their hotel, Mrs. Miller tells him that Daisy was very keen that he know she wasn't engaged to Giovanelli. Soon after, Daisy gets Roman fever and dies. She is buried in Rome. Winterbourne goes back to Geneva soon after, but he comes back to Vevey the next year to see his aunt. There, he thinks that he misunderstood Daisy and that she would have liked his respect. Winterbourne is back in Geneva at the end of the book, either learning or, as some people say, chasing after a foreign woman.
About the author. Henry James was the second oldest of 5 children. His father, Henry James Sr., was a lecturer and social thinker, and he was the third child. James's family went back and forth between New York, Rhode Island, Paris, and Geneva while he was growing up. Because they moved around so much, he and his brothers had a kind of random education. Later, the James family moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts. Henry went to Harvard Law School, but he soon dropped out. During the Civil War, he started publishing stories and writing for magazines and newspapers like The Nation. In 1874, he moved to Italy to write a book. In 1875, he stayed in Europe for good. He first lived in Paris, where he met writers like Gustave Flaubert and Émile Zola. He then moved to London. After The Portrait of a Lady came out in 1880, James's short stories and books started to be read all over the world. James never got married. He was attracted to guys, but he kept his sexuality a secret from almost everyone he knew. In James's late period, the first few years of the 20th century, he wrote 3 important books: The Wings of the Dove, The Ambassadors, and The Golden Bull. After moving back to New York in 1905, he spent a lot of time revising a number of his works and writing literary introductions to them. These introductions are now seen as great pieces in their own right. But even though critics liked his work, the general people didn't, and he started to feel very sad about it. He got better and went back to England. He lived to see World War I start and died in London.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.